Welcome back to Payback Logs. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're gonna love it here. I've spent 30 years living in the world of the invisible. Most people think money is what you see in a bank account or a wallet, but at FinCEN, we know better. Money is a trail of heat. It's a digital footprint that never stops bleeding data. As a senior analyst, my job was to follow that blood until I found the wolf. Now that I'm retired, I apply that same precision to my morning tea and my flower beds. My home is my fortress, a quiet estate on the edge of town that my wife Evelyn and I spent a lifetime securing. It operates on a schedule that would make a Swiss watch look sloppy. That was until Melanie, my daughter-in-law, decided my silence was a sign of weakness. Melanie is a woman who lives for the frame. If she isn't at a gallery opening, a charity auction, or a country club brunch, she feels like she's disappearing. To her, my 50 acres of prime timberland and the colonial estate sitting on it aren't a home. They're unlocked equity for her social climb. She arrived on a Tuesday at 11 a.m., unannounced. She was wearing an outfit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan and carrying a stack of folders she tried to hide under a bag of organic pastries from the bakery in town. "Arthur, you look like you've been in the garden," she said, her voice bright and artificial, like a bird call recorded on a cheap phone. She didn't hug me. Melanie doesn't hug people. She performs a proximity ritual. "I brought some treats and a few boring papers for the neighborhood beautification project we're starting." She set the pastries on the kitchen table and spread the papers out. She was talking fast, a classic distraction flood. She was babbling about a community garden, a new playground, and how the historical character of the neighborhood needed protecting. "I just need your signature on this consent form, Arthur," she said, sliding a page toward me. "It just says you support the Green Initiative. It'll save me so much time at the town hall meeting." I didn't reach for my pen. I looked at the signature line. In my line of work, you develop a sense for the physical world. I looked at the ink already on the page, the pre-printed sections. Then I looked at the witness signature Melanie had already supposedly obtained from a neighbor. The ink didn't catch the light the way a standard ballpoint does. It was flat, dense, and had a slight bluish-purple halo at the edges. It's archival pigment ink, the kind used by professional forgers and high-end document restorers because it's resistant to chemical erasure and doesn't fade under forensic lighting. Nobody uses that for a neighborhood beautification consent form. "Melanie," I said, my voice low and dry, "this is a very specific type of pen. Is your neighbor a calligrapher?" She froze for a millisecond, the kind of hesitation only an analyst notices. It's the hiccup in the data. "Oh, yes, I think she is. She's very artistic. Why, is there a problem?" "No problem," I said, leaning back. I didn't sign it. I just tapped the paper with my finger. "I'll just read through the bylaws tonight and drop it off at your house tomorrow. I wouldn't want to sign something without doing my due diligence. FinCEN habits die hard, you know." The look that flashed across her face wasn't annoyance. It was fear. Just for a second, she realized she wasn't dealing with a lonely old man in a cardigan. She was dealing with a man who had spent 30 years looking at the things people tried to hide in plain sight. I opened my black moleskin. Tuesday, 11:15 a.m. Subject, Melanie. Attempted deed fraud via document layering. Ink, archival pigment. Narrative, the hunt has begun. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. Melanie didn't take my due diligence as a warning. Instead, she took it as a challenge. She realized that if she couldn't trick me in the light, she would have to bury me in the fog. The following week, the concern started. It was a calculated social media-ready campaign designed to erode my credibility before I could ever open my mouth. It began with a luncheon Melanie hosted at my own house. She didn't ask, she simply informed me that the Heritage Society needed a venue, and as my daughter-in-law, she was happy to shoulder the burden of hosting. I spent the afternoon watching 36 women in oversized sunglasses wander through my halls, touching my antiques like they were already tagged for an estate sale. "Arthur, dear, you're looking a bit tired," Melanie said, loud enough for a group of friends to hear as I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water. "Did you forget to take your vitamins again? I noticed you left the stove on this morning. I had to come over and turn it off." I hadn't touched the stove. I'd had cold cereal and spent the morning in the garden. "The stove was off, Melanie," I said, my voice steady. She gave her friends a meaningful, tragic look, the kind of look you give someone talking to a ghost. "Of course it was, Arthur. Don't worry about it. Why don't you go lie down? I've moved your desk to the guest room anyway. It's much quieter for your naps." She hadn't just moved the desk. She had organized my office, which in FinCEN terms is called evidence tampering. My favorite fountain pen, a gift from the director upon my retirement, was gone. My filing cabinets had been rearranged. She was trying to create a physical environment that felt unfamiliar to me, hoping I'd start to believe my own memory was failing. That evening, my son, David, came over. He looked ragged. "Dad, Melanie told me about the deed. She said you signed it over to the family trust months ago to avoid the new estate taxes, but now you're claiming you've never seen it. She's worried, Dad. We're both worried." "I never signed a deed, David. I was a senior analyst. I don't sign anything with 3 copies and a notary I've vetted myself." "She has the scan, Dad. She showed it to me on her phone. It looks like your signature, exactly like it." I looked at my son. He's a good man, but he's a top-level thinker. He sees the result. He doesn't look for the artifacts of the process. He didn't know about archival pigment and document layering. He just saw a daughter-in-law helping and a father who seemed to be losing his grip. "David," I said, leaning in, "when a bank is being robbed from the inside, the first thing the thief does is break the security cameras. Melanie isn't trying to help my memory. She's trying to disable my sensors." I played the part for the rest of the night. I misplaced my glasses. I asked the same question twice. I let Melanie see exactly what she wanted, a man who was finally, mercifully, becoming a non-factor. But while they were at dinner, I was performing a different kind of audit. I went to the driveway and used my phone to snap photos of the VIN numbers on the luxury cars Melanie's friends had driven over. In my world, you don't just follow the person, you follow the asset flow. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. The house fell silent after the last luxury SUV pulled away, leaving behind the smell of expensive catering and the lingering chill of Melanie's concern. I didn't turn on the lights in the main hall. I didn't need them. I walked down the stairs to the basement, to the climate-controlled room that houses my personal library and my most private records. This room is the only place in the house Melanie hasn't touched. She thinks it's just a dusty cellar full of old government manuals and tax records. She's wrong. It's an archive of a life lived with precision. I sat at my secondary desk and looked at the framed photo of Evelyn. She was a cartographer for the Geological Survey. She spent her career defining boundaries, drawing the lines that told people where the solid ground ended and the marsh began. "Arthur," she'd told me once when we were first surveying this acreage, "a border only exists if it is defended. If you don't walk the perimeter, the woods will eventually take the house." We had walked this perimeter together for 40 years. Every tree, every stone wall, every inch of the timberland was a record of our shared history. This wasn't equity to be flipped for a seat on a charity board. It was the physical manifestation of our life's work. I remembered the treasury audits I used to lead in the 90s. We'd walk into a bank that looked perfectly healthy on the surface, marble floors, smiling tellers, mahogany desks. But once we opened the subledges, we'd find the rot. We'd find the social climbers of that era, men and women who thought they could outrun their own shadows by spending other people's futures. Melanie was just the latest iteration of a very old pattern. She wasn't just trying to steal a house, she was trying to rewrite the map Evelyn had drawn. She was trying to erase the boundary between my life and her ambition. I pulled a leather-bound logbook from the shelf. It contained the original survey maps of the property, signed by the county surveyor and notarized in 1982. Then I pulled out a small specialized tool, a high-magnification forensic loupe with a built-in scale. I thought about David. My son has his mother's eyes, but my early career idealism. He wants to believe the best of people, which makes him the perfect blind for a predator like Melanie. She wasn't just stealing my land, she was stealing my son's perception of his father. She was turning his grief into a weapon. The episodes she was manufacturing, the forgotten signatures, they were all part of her attempt to devalue the asset. In her mind, if I was broken, the house was hers to fix. "The Woods aren't taking this house today, Evelyn," I whispered. I felt a cold, familiar resolve settle into my bones. When I was at FinCEN, we didn't get angry at the fraudsters. Anger clouds the data. We simply mapped them. We identified the nodes, the flow of capital, and the point of maximum leverage. I wasn't a forgetful old man. I was a senior analyst, and I had just identified a threat actor inside the perimeter. It was time to start the quiet audit. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. I didn't need to leave my basement to begin the dismantling. In the digital age, a social climber leaves a trail of breadcrumbs made of vanity and debt. Melanie thought she was sophisticated, but to a man trained to spot international money laundering, she was as transparent as a window pane. I opened my secure laptop and bypassed the standard residential service. I used a private VPN and a set of old consultant credentials to access the county's digital land records. There it was, file 2026-XJ, a newly recorded statutory warranty deed for my estate, timestamped 3 days ago. I zoomed in on the scan of the signature. To David, it looked like my handwriting. To me, it was a forensic disaster. The A in Arthur had a tremor stop, a tiny hesitation where the stylus of the forgery software had recalibrated. It was a digital ghost. But a deed is just the what. I needed the why. I began a beneficial ownership search on the company listed as the trustee for the new deed, Golden Horizon Holdings, LLC. Melanie was careful. She wasn't listed on the front page, but she'd forgotten about the K-1 tax schedules. I tracked the LLC's registration back to a shell company in Nevada, which in turn pointed directly to a lifestyle consultant named Julian Vane. Julian Vane wasn't a consultant. He was a high-end predator. He targeted wealthy women in the country club circuit, convincing them to invest in luxury developments that didn't exist. He'd put Melanie in a hole so deep she couldn't see the sky. I printed out the audit trail. I highlighted the digital watermarks on the forged deed and cross-referenced them with the IP address of Melanie's home office, which I'd captured when she'd used my Wi-Fi during her luncheon. She thought she was playing a game of he said, she said. She didn't realize that in my world, there is no he said. There is only the transaction log. I sat back and watched the clock. It was 2 a.m. In 8 hours, I'd have to face David and pretend I was the forgetful father again. But the senior analyst in me was already calculating the point of impact. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. The next morning, the house felt colder, even though the thermostat said 70. The audit was done, the numbers were locked, but the hardest part of the investigation was about to walk through the door. David arrived at 9 a.m. He didn't have a briefcase or a stack of papers. He just had a look of profound, weary sadness. He sat at the kitchen table, the very spot where Melanie had tried to slide that forged deed under a box of pastries. "Dad," he started, his voice thick, "I spent all night thinking about what you said, about censors and robberies, but I also talked to Melanie. She showed me a video,
from the security camera she installed in the hallway to keep an eye on you. I felt a prickle of interest. A video? It's from last Tuesday. It shows you standing at the desk, signing a paper, and then staring at it for 5 minutes like you didn't know your own name. Melanie says it's clear evidence of a dissociative episode. I knew that video. I had been standing at the desk, yes. I had been signing a change of address form for my botanical magazine, and I had been staring at the desk because I realized Melanie had stolen my retirement fountain pen. She had edited the footage, cropped the document out, and recontextualized a moment of quiet anger into a portrait of mental collapse. She wasn't just gaslighting me anymore. She was surgically removing my son's faith in his father to clear a path for the assisted living facility she'd already scouted. "David," I said, looking at him with a clarity that seemed to startle him, "if I am as far gone as she says, why hasn't she called a doctor? Why is she calling a real estate developer instead?" "She's trying to protect the estate before the state steps in, Dad. That's what she told me. She says if you're declared incompetent without a trust in place, the taxes will eat everything." He was repeating her script, word for word. He was the secondary victim, the collateral damage of a social climber's desperation. Melanie was willing to break my son's heart and orphan him while I was still sitting right in front of him, all to pay off a lifestyle consultant in Nevada. I saw the tear hit the table. David wasn't greedy, he was scared. He was mourning me while I was still breathing because he trusted the woman he shared a bed with. In that moment, the senior analyst stepped aside and the father took the lead. The counterstrike couldn't just be about the land anymore. It had to be a total exorcism. I had to show David the wolf, not just the tracks. "Go home, David," I said softly. "Tell Melanie I'm feeling particularly foggy today. Tell her I think she was right about the deed and that I'd like to host a dinner for her and her friends this Friday to celebrate the new foundation. Tell her I want to make a public statement." David looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes, hope that the conflict was over. "Really, Dad? You'll do that?" "I'll do exactly what needs to be done," I promised. He left, looking lighter. I watched him go, feeling a heavy, cold fury that no ledger could contain. Melanie thought she was using David as a shield. She didn't realize she had just turned him into the detonator. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. The house was quiet, but it was the silence of a clock right before the alarm triggers. Melanie was already planning the menu for the victory gala, thinking she had finally broken my spirit. She didn't realize, in the world of federal investigations, we call this the controlled delivery. You let the target take the bait, let them gather all their co-conspirators in one room, and then you seal the exits. I spent Wednesday and Thursday moving with the invisible precision of a ghost. I didn't stop the forgery process. I perfected it. Layer 1, the microdot tracker. I left my official notary seal, the one from my treasury days, sitting in an unlocked drawer in the study. I knew Melanie's greed would compel her to use it to authenticate the secondary filings for the Nevada Shell Company. What she didn't know was that I had coated the seal with a synthetic DNA liquid, a forensic marker invisible to the naked eye, but permanent under a specific frequency of light. Every document she touched was now a physical confession. Layer 2, the automatic SAR. I contacted a former colleague at the bank where Melanie held her charity accounts. I didn't ask for a favor. I provided a verified tip of suspicious activity involving a known threat actor, Julian Vane. This triggered an automatic suspicious activity report. The moment Melanie tried to move the equity from the forged deed, the federal censors would trip, freezing her accounts mid-transaction. Layer 3. The gala invitation. I encouraged Melanie to invite Julian Vane himself.
"I'll tell you what, Melanie," I told her, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "I'd love for him to see the estate before the redevelopment begins." She was so arrogant, she didn't even question it. She saw it as the ultimate endorsement. She was gathering the thief, the fence, and the buyers all under the roof of the man they were robbing. Layer 4, the digital witness. I reconfigured the security cameras she had installed to watch me. I didn't disable them. I rerouted the feed. Every conversation she had with Julian, every boast about how she'd handled the old man, and every mention of the forged signatures was being recorded to a secure cloud drive I'd shared with the FBI's white-collar crime division. I sat in my basement on Thursday night watching the guest list grow. Melanie was inviting the elite of the county, the people she wanted to impress. She was building a stage for her own execution. "I'll tell you what, Melanie," I whispered to the monitor. "You wanted a gala? I'm going to give you a premiere you'll never forget." I checked the time, 10 p.m. I went upstairs and laid out my best suit. I made sure my retirement lapel pin was polished. I wasn't just a father-in-law anymore. I was the audit. I'm going to let that sit for a moment. Keep listening. The chandelier in the main hall was dimmed to a warm, expensive amber. The house was packed, 60 people in silk and wool, sipping vintage champagne and admiring the architectural vision Melanie had plastered on digital displays around the room. Julian Vane was there, looking like a shark in a tuxedo, hovering near Melanie as if he already owned the floorboards. I entered the room at 9 p.m. I didn't lean on a cane. I didn't look for a chair. I walked straight to the center of the room, and the air seemed to change. The forgetful old man had vanished. In his place stood the man who had once frozen the assets of entire cartels. "Attention, everyone," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it had that dry, clinical resonance that used to make CFOs reach for their lawyers. Melanie hurried over, her smile a jagged line of panic. "Arthur, we weren't ready for the toast yet. Why don't you sit down, dear? You're looking a bit overstimulated." "I've never been more focused, Melanie," I said. I pulled a small black remote from my pocket. "You spent a lot of time telling people I was losing my mind. You spent even more time trying to forge my name to pay for your seat at this table. But you forgot one thing. I spent 30 years at FinCEN. I don't lose things, I track them." I clicked the remote. The architectural vision on the large screens vanished. In its place appeared a high-resolution forensic scan of the statutory warranty deed. Red circles highlighted the tremor stops in the forged signature. The room went deathly quiet. Julian Vane started edging toward the coat closet. "That document on the screen is a federal felony," I continued, my voice steady. "And the family trust Melanie told you about, it doesn't exist. It's a shell company registered in Nevada to a man currently under investigation for 16 counts of securities fraud." I clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a video feed, the one Melanie had edited to show my dissociative episode. But this was the unedited version. It showed Melanie sneaking into my office, stealing my fountain pen, and practicing my signature on a light box. "Dad?" David's voice came from the back of the room, cracked and hollow. He was looking at his wife like a stranger. Melanie finally snapped. "This is a lie. You're senile. You're making things up because you're bitter." "I'm an analyst, Melanie. I don't make things up. I verify them." I pulled a handheld UV light from my jacket and shined it on the trust documents sitting on the display table. The synthetic DNA marker glowed a brilliant neon violet.
That's my seal, and those are your fingerprints. You didn't just steal my land, you stole my son's peace of mind." The front doors didn't open, they were walked through. 2 men and a woman in dark suits entered the hall. One of them, a man I'd trained 15 years ago, walked straight to Julian Vane and Melanie. "Melanie Sterling, Julian Vane, I'm with the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding wire fraud, identity theft, and interstate transport of forged securities." The social climber didn't have a witty retort. She didn't have a frame. She just had a pair of steel handcuffs clicking around her wrists in front of every person she had ever tried to impress. The room erupted in whispers, the sound of 60 social lives being deleted in real time. I didn't watch them lead her out. I looked at David. His head was bowed. I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "She's gone, David," I said softly. "The sensors are back online." The gala was over. The audit was complete. The silence that followed the gala wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet Melanie had tried to impose. It was the clean, resonant stillness of a house that had been scrubbed of a contagion.
The legal proceedings moved with the cold efficiency of a balanced equation. Melanie's lifestyle consultant, Julian Vane, turned out to be the domino that knocked over 6 other frauds across the West Coast. He's currently serving 15 years. Melanie, facing the mountain of forensic evidence I'd compiled, took a plea deal. She's serving 4 years for wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The social circle she had sacrificed everything to join didn't just abandon her, they erased her. In that world, a felony isn't just a crime, it's a breach of the brand. The estate is once again a sanctuary. The forged deed was vacated by court order, and the title is back where it belongs, indexed and filed in my basement archive. The timberland is quiet, save for the wind in the pines and the occasional sound of a hammer. David and I are rebuilding. It's slow work. Fixing a relationship is harder than fixing a ledger, but we're getting there. He spends his weekends here now, not to keep an eye on me, but to help me restore Evelyn's old mapping room. We don't talk about the video or the episodes. We talk about the future. I'm sitting on the porch today. The morning sun is hitting the gravel driveway at that familiar sharp angle. I have a $10 bill in my hand, change from the nursery where I bought some new rose bushes to replace the ones Melanie's caterers trampled. I pull my black moleskin from my breast pocket. Serial number NL44029-188A. I record the number with a hand that is perfectly steady. People still drive by and see a retired man in a cardigan obsessing over the minutiae of his life. They see a relic. They think the world has moved on to faster, more chaotic things. They're wrong. The world is still made of numbers, signatures, and trails, and as long as people think they can outrun the data, there will be a need for someone to keep the log. I look out over the perimeter. The woods haven't taken the house. The boundaries are firm. I close the notebook and click my pen. It's a new one, a gift from David, a fountain pen, weighted perfectly. 10 a.m., time to check the mail.